Ready? Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the March 2024 meeting of the Urban Forestry Commission. I'll remind everybody that this is primary election day, so if you haven't voted, please do so before the polls close this evening and do your civic duty. I am Patrick Gilbert. I will be your host for the afternoon. And before we get to the agenda, we'll go through introductions. First, on the Urban Forestry Commission, I will say that Ed Macy is absent today. He has the inevitable task of chaperoning his daughter and her friends on spring break at the beach. So he will be with us next meeting. Chardon?
Chardon Dietrich, Urban Forestry Commission.
Karen?
Karen McNeil, Urban Forestry Commission.
Chris?
Chris DeFiore, Urban Forestry Commission.
Zoe?
Zoe Boyle, Urban Forestry Commission.
Patricia?
Patricia Grace, Urban Forestry Commission.
Jan?
John Michael Henson, Urban Forestry Commission.
And I am Patrick Gilbert. I'm the chair of the Urban Forestry Commission. Kim Roney, our council liaison, is not with us today. She is obviously out working the polls. Keith?
Keith Aiken, Urban Forester.
Madeline?
Madeline Stone, Planning Technician.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Lautner, Zoning Superintendent.
Chris?
Chris Collins, Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design.
Okay. Haley?
Haley Mahoney, Development Review Specialist.
Thank you. And one of our presenters for later in the meeting, Nicole.
I'm Nicole McNeil, representing Asheville.
Okay. Anybody else that I overlooked? Okay, some ground rules first before we get started. On public comment, public comment is limited to 3 minutes. In terms of board members or staff who wish to speak during the meeting, please raise your hand and be recognized by the chair. All discussions will be within the Urban Forestry Commission members, unless we invite other people such as staff to be part of that discussion. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll move into approval of the minutes for the February 2024 Urban Forestry Commission meeting. Those were included in your material packet as well as the agenda. I hope everyone has read it. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The minutes of the February 2024 Urban Forestry Commission has been unanimously approved. We will go now into alternative compliance. Nancy, did you want to give your presentation before we get into that, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just an overview of what what alternative compliance is. Since we have some new members on the board, this is something that sometimes we do during orientation. And this is for later for you. But it's just a general overview, since we have, I think, 3 new members, maybe 4 that have come on board since we did this last. So it's just, what is alternative compliance? So basically, alternative compliance is when a customer development comes through the permitting office and they can't meet the landscaping requirements in 711-3, based on, for certain reasons or another, there are a number of alternative compliance that are written into the code that staff can automatically approve. There are a number that are not. And so this is the process in which the applicants will come to you to seek an alternative to that landscaping plan that still meets the spirit of the ordinance. And most commonly, these are with new developments. Sometimes we have them with vacancies that you've seen where they have site compliance downtown and they don't have to extend, like the sidewalk is what it is, and they would, alter ADA compliance for that. That's a common one. One that you will see today is one that is less common, where we have a conditional zoning that has had to go in and remove some trees that have died or are dying, and we need to seek an alternative landscaping plan, but that is still an alternative compliance because this is the compliance based on their zoning that they were approved for back in 2015. So alternative compliance has specific standards that y'all look for that I'll go through as to the conditions that they will need to meet to be able to approve those things. And it is different from Article 19, so we're talking about Article 11.3, where Article 19 is tree canopy preservation, and they're just differences between those ordinances that sometimes they don't play well as well together. They do, but sometimes you can't mix them up too much. But they definitely correspond. So that's the standards that y'all are looking at is the site, and this is something that the applicant also has to make and present their findings, and staff will do an assessment of this too. But is the site affected by physical conditions or constraints that make compliance with the standard requirements, the standard landscaping requirements, practically impossible? Do physical conditions or constraints of the site are not a result of the applicant's own action? The proposed alternative will not create a safety hazard. The proposed alternative will, upon maturity, provide landscaping that is equal to or better than the standard requirements. And the proposed landscaping is designed to address plant health and vigor. The proposed alternative is reasonably compatible with the natural and topographic features of the site. And as the proposed alternative supports the purpose statement of the landscaping and buffering ordinance. And that is generally the criteria. And so in the staff report, we go through those criteria for you so that y'all can see how the applicant has addressed it and then what staff also has found based on those. And then these are just some examples of ones that we find. A lot of times it's in the urban environment where we have utility conflicts or ADA compliance, and a lot of times it's spacing. Or you have topography with severe slopes. I'm not talking just like a slope, but like a severe, like a big cut slope or something. So that's and so this one is a project on Collier that had some spacing issues, so they were a little bit too close. But they did the elevated pavement, the structural pavement above them, and allowed for additional root area. But this one was that they were just spaced a little bit too close together. And this one was one on Short Cox that I think they moved the proposed trees on site, but where they came into a number of utility conflicts. and that was specifically a storm drain underneath where we would want tree grades. And I think that one also had the elevation of the storm drain was fairly close to the surface. So, and then this was the approved landscaping plan. So then we have another option that is a little bit different than alternative compliance. It's called the alternative landscaping plan. We don't see these very often. They are a little bit more, there's not as many standards around them, so it's a little bit harder to get at sometimes. But typically they are in steep slopes. Well, they're always in a steep slope. This is from the steep slope ordinance. And it's when a property owner has inherited a home that has had elaborate landscaping from back before we had the steep slope ordinance, which is one that we have an example of, or if they've removed trees without proper permitting and we actually have to do a remediation plan. So those are ones that are more common that I think y'all have seen. And then there was this one at Sunset Summit. This one came back 3 or 4 times. But because they had a number of existing trees that they wanted to remove and they had an alternative landscaping plan. So they worked through them with the design professional and with you guys to come up with an appropriate conceptual plan. Do y'all have any questions about alternative compliance or alternative landscaping plans? No? Okay. And I will set the stage for Haley at 700 Biltmore. It's the alternative compliance case where we have an existing site plan that was approved, it's conditional zoning, and they were required to keep trees that y'all will see. And those trees have not doing so hot.
Before Haley starts, I will add that if a alternative compliance applicant meets one or more of those 7 criteria, then we must approve the alternative compliance request. We can make non-binding recommendations, but we cannot make adherence to those recommendations condition upon approval.
Right, so that was the other thing that I forgot to clarify. With alternative compliance cases, basically this board is making a recommendation to the planning director, which then the applicant can appeal to the planning director. We have never had that situation come upon us. And that you can condition that recommendation. As you will see, we have one before you today that will have some recommended recommendations that we worked with Keith on, that staff worked with Keith on. And so you can condition that recommendation for staff, and then staff will look for those conditions to be met during the plan review. So, right.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice seeing some familiar faces here. So today we are looking at the alternative compliance case for 700 Biltmore Avenue, also known as the residences at Biltmore. Here we have the original, well, not really the original plans were from 2005 conditional zoning project, and then there was an amendment in 2015. This plan here represents the most recent approved site plan for the site. The 2015 scope of work was basically to build out some of the commercial buildings you see towards the southern portion, southeast portion of the plan there, and additionally put in some retaining walls around that parking lot that's a little bit to the west adjacent. You'll see some trees right there in front of it. There's some hemlocks and some other deciduous on site that were specifically called out as part of this 2015 CUP that were supposed to be preserved. However, as part of this amended scope of work, the development regraded and changed the layout of the parking lot adjacent to Building 1, and then the open green space located along the frontage where Caledonia meets Biltmore Avenue. They're kind of at the southern point of the plans. This work severely changed drainage patterns on site and effectively swamped and damaged a swath of hemlocks and some deciduous trees that were required as part of this preservation. Went too many slides. Don't know how that keeps happening to me. Anywho, I have some photos here of the existing conditions on site. As you can see kind of there in the background, you'll see the hemlocks there against the retaining wall. They're not doing super hot. I have some more images to just demonstrate that. And the aerial, you can also see some of the tree death. And when I show you the removal plan, you'll kind of see how that lines up with the canopies that are not looking so great there. Here's a few various views and photos I took during a site visit. We have a look from the south area of the park, near the parking lot, and then another view looking north from the open green, and then looking east from Biltmore Avenue, standing kind of near the sidewalks. So now we have the removal plan in front of us here. Oh wait, where did? I knew a slide got skipped somewhere. I was like, that's not right order. So the proposed alternative compliance request, let's discuss this in detail before we look at the replacements plans. They want to remove and replace declining and dead trees to improve site safety, tree canopy health, and aesthetics. The project will also reestablish a street screening buffer. The landscape standard here that is applicable is going to be from the CUP from 2015. This makes this different than most of the cases you all look at, because usually you're working underneath our typical section of code and 7.11.3. So the requested alternative is to remove 21 trees that are in declining health. This work was looked at by a board-certified arborist. Specifically, they want to remove 17 hemlocks, 2 walnuts, 1 white oak, and 1 hickory. And then their proposed replacement consists of the removed hemlocks with bald cypress, the 2 walnuts with southern white oak, and the white oak with a southern white oak, and the hickory with a bald cypress. That's where that was supposed to be, so we've already looked at those. Now we'll look at the removal plan. So this here shows what trees are marked for removal. I will note that there was a 2023 removal that was applied for around the fall that was approved. As part of that scope of work, there was 5 deciduous trees on site. 2 of those were part of this plan that must be maintained. So there is some duplication between the 2023 scope of work and this new scope of work. So as far as considerations for the site, basically we're looking at, due to the change in the environment and the decline of hemlocks region-wide, there's not really the ability to require a like-for-like replacement in this scenario, and that's what would be required typically by code. There are some similar species, such as bald cypress, that can replace the hemlocks, but they're not evergreen. There are a variety of hardwoods that would be appropriate for those removed. Additionally, we're just looking at an issue where the hemlocks provided an evergreen visual barrier, along with the hardwoods, and there was not many options for how to replicate this feature. With this in mind, the staff and the applicant are seeking advice and guidance from you all on what can be approved that would retain the spirit of that original 2015 approval. So now we'll look at the applicant's replacement plan. I don't know if you'll all be able to see from here, but as mentioned previously, they're planning on taking out all the trees there on my left of the screen here. I think it'd be y'all's right. And it's 3 different species coming out, but only 2 different species proposed for replacement. So not really as much diversity as we could achieve on site to kind of hit the points that you all are looking at for criteria of long-term site viability. And none of those species they proposed are evergreen. So staff findings, well, staff don't normally propose very specific conditions for an alternative compliance request. In this case, we felt it might be appropriate. So working with Keith and Nancy, we kind of came up with an idea of what would be an appropriate replacement plan. So with this in mind, staff recommends approval with the following conditions: that a mixture of evergreen and deciduous are provided to establish a screening buffer that was originally required as part of that CUP. And this would need to be mixed because a solely deciduous buffer would not provide adequate screening throughout the year. Though the branching of bald cypress is a good choice to put in there because it does help kind of provide that a little bit. That the removal of the walnut roots and hemlock chips and foliage is required prior to replacement. This is to ensure long-term viability of the replacement species. Additionally, the proposed locations and mixtures shall conform with the following. Within the wet swale areas on site, we'd like to see 10 bald cypress and 6 deciduous that could be a mixture of sycamore, black gum, and sweet gum with either 2 of each species or 3 and 3 of 2 of those. In the upland area, we'd like to see American holly, southern white oak, and 2 of these upland trees need to be named and meet the standards as a street tree. So let's look at this a little bit more in the context of the site. So we've kind of broken it down to blue, red, and green areas. The blue area represents that wet swale area where we'd like to see the bald cypress and the mix of deciduous. And the non-swale areas, we have the red area where we propose the American hollies to go. And then that green area represents where we think it would be appropriate to have southern white oak. And I'll note that, again, some of the southern white oak proposed is a duplicate of the removal from 2023. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Haley. Are there any questions from commission members for Haley at this time?
I have a question.
Karen?
Can you tell me if the arborist who evaluated the trees is the same arborist that will be removing them?
I do not believe so. Is the applicant with us today? But I don't believe so. I believe they're contracted with somebody that's not a certified arborist. But I could get back to you on that very quickly.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear it.
I was just asking if the arborist that evaluated the trees was the same arborist that will be contracted for the removal?
I can answer that. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
I had spoken with him last week.
Okay, because I know at some point they changed who they were working with on the site from when they originally came to me and now.
Yeah, so they, I believe there was the initial arborist that you had spoken with, and then last week I spoke with Nick Maidmet, who is essentially will be in charge of, removing those trees that are in there, and not sure whether he'll actually be the one replacing them or not, but, he will definitely be removing them.
Chris?
I was wondering if the arborist or other folks had commented on the soil conditions that are currently there.
Commented on the soil issues?
Yeah.
They have not gotten back to me on these specific recommendations.
Was there an arborist involved in the initial grading of that project back in 2015?
I am not sure. The grading project back in 2015, typically with grading of that scale, I imagine they would have been working with an engineer because those retaining walls are pretty hefty.
Sure. Yeah, I would just like to point out that the death of those trees is most likely not a result of drainage primarily. It's mostly a result of grading over the root systems.
I would
I watched
agree.
that project happen and documented it, and there was absolutely zero regard given to those trees. And it is my view that if a professional had been engaged and involved in that, then we wouldn't be here having this discussion. Those trees would still be alive. And to Chris's point, I would definitely recommend assessing the soil and having a certified arborist plant those trees, because all that is just fill. And so there's going to be significant remediation to do to have a healthy tree grow there.
And Keith you were going to be in contact with the arborist to discuss some of those points, right? Because I know you brought up when we were making recommendations, you brought up that you would like to see some soil remediation of, such as the removal of the trees and the chips or not the trees, sorry, the roots and the chips. And
Yeah,
the
so
foliage.
we were originally had the mindset of removing the hemlock root systems out of the soil because of allelopathic chemicals. After I did some more research on that, we decided to walk back on that. But we are requiring or asking the applicant to when they go back and plant the bald cypress, to move them back up the hill out of the wet zone there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and are you still requiring the walnut roots to be removed?
So we are requiring that the walnut root systems be removed because we know from research that is definitely going to be poisoning the soil. Those trees have already been taken out So I'm not sure how much of the stump is left there, but yeah, we are requiring that.
Like, even if the walnuts have been dead for a couple years, research shows that it's still in the soil, it's still active, even though there's no sap flowing or anything in the roots.
So are you saying that
But you still believe it's allelopathic based
Yeah, I
on the
mean,
trees being
you know,
dead several years?
I've not read any real, hard research that says, when that period is. So we're just kind of going on with the idea that, I would say, my own professional opinion, probably 5 years would be a good, number to use. So, I mean, unless we actually had the soil tested, I think, erring on the side of removing the root systems would be appropriate.
Yeah, I just questioned about the amount of diesel and site disturbance, already done to that site, and if it's really necessary to remove, entire root systems to plant. Yeah, I'd be curious if that chemical is still active and if that's really necessary to plant new trees. It's just a thought.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Patricia?
Yes, in reading your petition, I got the impression, and I might not have read it well or correctly, that the problem with the trees was possibly caused due to the construction you had there in developing some amenities for the people that, rent there. And prior to that change, due to the construction, how are the trees doing at that point?
That's an excellent question. It's definitely, it's an excellent question. It's definitely before my time with the city. Chardon could probably speak to that because it sounds like he's been looking at this site for a long time.
Yeah, I can answer that. The trees were healthy. There was a really large red oak at the top. Had some typical dead branches in it, but the hemlocks were healthy down below. And
Could you speak up right a bit?
all the trees were healthy before they started grading.
They were
in
healthy
2015,
before
2016.
okay.
In order to pass city inspection, they had to have been some level of good health when
They were.
when we passed the inspection.
They were
for them.
healthy. So that leads me to another question regarding, let's see, the physical condition constraints are not a result of the applicant's own actions.
That is the
But-
difficult part of this request, to be honest. And that's why staff have been taking so much care in making a very specific recommendation that we feel would be long-term viable. We can't go backwards, but going forwards, we need to make sure that whatever's there is appropriate and will last.
Okay, I see, thank you.
Chris? And then Karen?
I think on the point of it being not a result of the applicant's own actions, from what I can see of the pictures, the grading and the lack of topsoil are huge factors to declining tree health.
Absolutely.
And it would be my recommendation that some sort of significant soil remediation is part of this plan.
And ideally, too, we want them to move them a little bit out of that ditch. So hopefully the soil is a little bit more viable up there. But that is a valid suggestion.
Karen?
I'd just like to take a moment to consider what we could do better between the original plan and what's happening now to protect those trees, if we have any thoughts on that. I mean, it kind of goes along with enforcement but I myself am still not clear on what can be done, so I'm curious how we can help other people in the future do better in projects like this, so this doesn't happen,
Are you directing that to the urban
I
forester?
kind of am, yeah.
We're kind of making eye contact.
Yeah, if you have ideas on that we could discuss for a
I
moment.
think that can be resolved with routine inspections, whether that be a 2 or 3 year cycle, going back in and checking those commercial sites and, making sure that they still are in compliance, making sure that they're keeping up with the health of their trees as well.
Yeah, because we see grading situations like this, I think, pretty often where we know the trees are being impacted, but I don't know really what we can do at that point. The damage is done, it seems like. So I'd like to figure out some sort of prevention for that.
Inspection and recording.
Yeah.
You know, having some sort of database that we can say this tree was looked at or this site was looked at, and then we can go back and reference that material, you know, in the future when we have problems like this.
And then we have, what would accountability look like for that, do you think?
I don't know. Maybe that's something we need to hash out in the urban
Yeah.
forest master plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Thanks.
Are there any other questions before? I have one question. I know that there is a checklist that certified arborists are supposed to go through to determine if, in fact, a tree is dying or if it's damaged beyond repair. Do we know that, whether that checklist was used in making that determination for, I think, what, these 21 trees?
I do not. We were only supplied with the arborist report, as that's what the, I
Do you
think that's
know,
what we
Keith?
require.
The way I understood it is the ownership has changed hands there. And so sort of, they didn't let the new owners know kind of what's going on. And so I'm not really sure what the history on the project is, you know, other than what I reviewed.
So that assessment was done under the previous ownership, is that correct?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was, I'm a little unfamiliar with the ownership change, but I do know that there has been a change in who was working on this tree removal. Initially, back end of summer, somebody approached about it to ask questions, and the person that did that arborist report and started the scope of work is not the person that is taking the work all the way through to finish. But they're both board-certified arborists.
Is there someone from the applicant here who could answer that?
Doesn't appear that anybody
No.
showed up.
No, there's
Okay,
not.
all right. Chardon?
What is that big grassy area used for?
Mostly just as an amenity space for the people at the Biltmore residences, you know, walk their dogs, lay on the lawn, read a book, that sort of thing. It's not really super developed. There's a little walkway. Let's see if I can see it on the aerial to point it out to you. There's like a little walkway down there. You can kind of see meandering through the green around towards where the hemlocks are. That's really all that's down there. It's a big open green space. There's plenty of room for planting, if that's what you're asking.
And I didn't do the math, but is it being replaced like one for one, like 21 trees?
Yes,
going
we
back in?
have recommended a one-for-one replacement.
Okay.
Except for, like I said, it's not like for like, because the hemlocks, we just really don't have anything that
Sure. Yeah.
is them,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
You know, pulling the trees, like getting them up the slope a little bit. I still agree with Chris that there's going to be significant soil remediation that needs to be done because from all I saw, that's just like 8 feet of fill that got put on those trees. So it's just no organic matter in those. You know, I'd be curious with the premise of, you know, you can't replace trees that were grown from seed on a site. I'd be curious about options to plant more than 21 trees and plant them in that grassy area with significant soil remediation and adequate mulch. I don't know if that's an option, Keith, to require more trees to be replanted?
I don't think we can require that of them. You know, we tried to meet their original planting plan as closely as we could. You know, obviously, we're not going to put the trees back where those hemlocks are. So I don't think we can require them to, you know, plant more trees in that area. I think that's kind of up to the applicant at that point.
Okay, thanks.
So on the one criteria whereby that we have to consider, that being that the request is not a result of anything that the applicant has done, it seems like that applied to the previous owner, in terms of not taking care to safeguard the critical root areas of those trees. It doesn't apply to the current applicant, is that correct? Or
The applicant that is doing the tree removal is, yes, a different person, different scope of work than what happened in 2015. I don't know what relation they might still have to anybody that was part of that scope of work in 2015, and it sounds like there might even be a new ownership there. But to your point, yes, it does seem like it doesn't meet that part. But they can't replace them with hemlock, so we have to come up with something here, guys. So I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say and what replacement you all think will be appropriate, as we can't get the hemlocks back.
So before I entertain a motion, is there any public comment on this alternative compliance case? None? Okay. Yeah, as long as there's no public comment on it, go ahead.
I would just like to reiterate a former point, is that I'm having a hard time with some of the requirements and seeing how it meets them. I just want to have an opportunity to discuss it further before a motion. My concern is that trees are going to be planted again, and they're going to die. They're going to have a short lifespan because the soil conditions are so poor. And I believe strongly that's why those trees died the first time. And so I don't want a repeat of that circumstance. So I'm interested in, there, as we all are, if there being trees replaced there that are going, but we want to ensure that they're going to live. And for me, personally, and from what I can see, I think soil remediation is a critical component of meeting many of these requirements up here. So I just want to share that.
We could add it to the recommended approval. And my experiences with alternative compliance, I don't know that I've ever seen one that required soil remediation. Patrick, or members that have been with the commission a while, is this something you've experienced in the
I
past?
don't remember.
Chris and Nancy, has soil remediation ever been part of an alternative compliance?
I mean, normally it's part of the actual
Planting of the plants?
planting
Yeah.
requirements as in terms of amendments and
Right.
depending on who design professional is for the planting plan. But
Would it be out of the scope of reason to add it to the conditions, staff recommended conditions?
Okay, so we have several options here. We could have a motion to approve the alternative compliance request. We could have a motion to approve the alternative compliance request with conditions, or we could have a motion to postpone action until the next meeting and request additional information. Karen?
It sounds like you're also still wanting some more input on tree species. Are you still wanting that? That was part of,
Yeah, we're
part
open,
of this
yes,
process?
absolutely open to
So
input
it
on
seems like we could, discuss our recommendation to go with a motion potentially for approval with the recommendation of soil remediation and certain species that we think would be appropriate. So should we discuss that recommendation in more detail before we make the motion?
I would make the motion, and then if there's a second, we can have further discussion. Anybody want to make a motion? Chris?
I motion to approve the alternative compliance with the added condition of both an arborist that is not involved in the removal, takes a look at the situation, and that there's soil remediation as part of the plan.
Can we have a definition of soil remediation?
I think I have your best person.
Extent of?
Are you asking to amend the motion?
Yes.
Let's have a second first. there a second to the motion?
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there an amendment to the motion?
Yes, I would like to amend the motion to include a definition of soil remediation to decompact the soil out to 15 feet on a radius around every tree that's planted using a pneumatic tool and incorporating organic material into the fill soil that is currently there.
Is the amendment okayed by the maker and the motion and the seconder?
Yes.
Yes, but I still think we need to talk about species at some point, too.
Or did you want to talk about species, or did you want to add that to the motion?
Also, we need to clarify if you're approving the proposed alternative compliance by the applicant, or if you want a motion to approve with the staff conditions. Because what they propose is much different than what staff have just described and outlined to you. What they propose is just a straight removal with replacement of 2 different types of species of trees. We tried to get a little bit more biodiverse with our staff recommendations. Thank you. Yeah.
So Chris, do you want to amend your motion for approval of the staff recommendation on the alternative compliance request? That's what she's saying.
So we're approving the staff recommendation.
And then your additional recommendation.
And then, yes.
This one's a complicated one, guys. I know. It's okay. We can just breathe.
So I approve the staff recommendation and would like to approve the motion with the like the previous spoken amendments. Yeah.
Okay, so first we have to vote on the amendments to the original motion. All in favor of the amendments signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The amendment to the motion is approved. Now the motion is on the table for discussion. Karen?
I would like to ask, since my background's in more public health and less in tree species, I would like to ask people more knowledgeable about tree species, if you have any input on what they should be including.
If I could clarify the goals of having a evergreen, is that going to, are you just trying to block the view of that retaining wall that is there?
It does kind of help bring that street buffer back where, it screens that retaining wall from the street view. I'll go back to the drawing, if that helps. So yeah, the American holly could go in either of those red areas that we named and provide a little bit of screening or act as a street tree. We feel like they need a little bit of evergreen, at least, to add back with the removal of the hemlocks to keep within the spirit.
And is that blue area, is that constantly, is that like a stream, or is that
So we
dry?
just named that as kind of the potentially, that's the area that has the potential for wet feet. It's not really, there's no stream going through there. It wasn't boggy when I was there, but after a good rain, I bet you it gets real boggy. It is sloped upwards. Let's see if I have a view that kind of shows it here. So this one, looking south from near the parking area, you can see where it kind of dips down. So we're thinking if they can bring the trees up that hill to the top of it, they can get them out of that. And that's what we tried to represent here, kind of with that blue area. It could be anywhere within there, but preferably maybe not in the ditchiest of ditch parts.
Well, I have an admission that I'm terrible at thinking about tree species on the spot. So I'm going to go through my phone and look at the a list of trees that I have, and it's one of my weak points that I'm always trying to work on.
I mean, it looks like
Karen?
the original plan was to just do a direct replacement, you said, and the staff findings are definitely suggesting more biodiversity.
Originally, they were going almost 1-for-1 with bald cypress, with all the trees to be removed. So it was only for 3 different types of species that were coming out. They're only going back with 2, and most of it being bald cypress. Now, while a lot of it's hemlock right now, I think, like has been discussing long-term viability for a site and the standards that we kind of hold things to, I think it is appropriate to get some more biodiversity. It's our opportunity.
Can you actually click back to that last slide, please?
This one?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry about this. I didn't realize this was popping up on your guys' screen too. Oh no, please don't restart.
I mean, I like the mix of sycamore, black gum, sweet gum. So mainly you're looking for something other than the bald cypress, perhaps.
Yeah, if we were to get more biodiverse, I guess that's the bulk of what we're proposing. Now, with that said, the bald cypress, we thought if they did put them in the area where we proposed, because of the branching on bald cypress, they would provide some year-round screening regardless of whether the leaves were on it or not.
We knew we couldn't replace the hemlocks in that soil where they were, so the next best possible option would have been to go for a bald cypress, which will, block the view of that wall a little bit and hide it. Even when they do drop their needles, they still have a lot of branches, and it's pretty thick, so I think it's a good alternative.
Chardon?
Sorry. I've been using American Beech as a screen just because they hold on to their lower leaves through the winter, and that can be pretty effective. They can be pretty finicky transplants, though, going back to soil remediation and making sure that they have, good food in the soil and decompacted and healthy soil conditions.
Do American beech and bald cypress grow well together typically?
I planted some, 20 feet apart, and they seem to be doing all right. Yeah.
May be appropriate to revise.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking more like up on top, where the hollies are. That's kind of where I was thinking for that.
Kind of
to
the
help
middle of
hide
that middle top area?
Yeah, to hide
The top of the swale
Yeah.
thing? Okay.
And there's also, not necessarily southern magnolia, but there's also other magnolia varieties that, they're more deciduous, but some of them can hang on to their leaves through the winter, like Sweet Bay. Sweet Bay magnolia is one. That could be another option. It's not going to be as screening as a holly or a southern magnolia, but it's something.
Thank you.
Before we go on, I just want to remind the commission members that this meeting is being recorded. So we're going to have to speak up, so our comments are picked up by the recording as part of the public record. Chardon, are you making a recommendation to add another species for the?
I think the staff is on the right track as far as their species diversity. I was more just spitballing ideas, 2 other ideas about possible plantings to hide the wall.
So are we ready to vote on the motion? So the motion on the floor that's been seconded is to approve the staff recommendation for the alternative compliance to 700 Biltmore Avenue with the condition that the trees that are planted with adequate soil volumes. Remediation. Everybody understand the motion? All right, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The staff recommendation for the alternative compliance request at 700 Biltmore Avenue is approved. Thank you, Haley.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today, everyone.
Okay.
It was nice seeing some of you again. Missed you guys.
Okay, the next alternative compliance case is 75 Glendale Avenue.
Yep.
Nancy Watford?
Yep. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, I'm Nancy Watford, zoning supervisor in Planning Urban Design Department. I'm standing in for Jennifer Blevins today. She is under the weather. So this alternative compliance case is at 75 Glendale Avenue. Here we go. Which is a fairly narrow lot, that's one thing. The project is for the construction of a 3,065 square foot manufacturing building on a vacant parcel of land, which requires it to be in compliance with Article 11 and Article 19, but Article 11 of the UDO. The landscaping standard applicable to the projects are street trees, parking lot landscaping, building impact landscaping, and property line buffers. Their requested alternative is a 50% reduction to the width and plant materials for a Type A property line buffer required along the south property line, allowance for some of the plant materials to be closer than 5 feet to the property line, an allowance for an accessible sidewalk from the building to the street as required by building code to encroach into the property line buffer. So here's the existing conditions of the site. As you can see, it's a fairly narrow site. It's not developed yet, so it's, or there might have been an old building there, I'm not sure. And this is the site plan, and so you can see, because of the zoning districts to the south and west, southwest. Southwest is up against a railroad right-of-way as well. Those are residential, so they have to have the property line buffer there, and staff can usually typically reduce it with a fence, but due to the complication, just the narrowness of the site, the fence would actually prohibit more planting, or, you know, they don't necessarily, of course, play well together, which is why we typically have that 5-foot distance from property line, especially if there's a fence. So that's why they're here today, to ask for those alternatives. And reducing it, let's see. Right, so this is the staff level approval. We do have that option if there is 50% of the width and plant materials if they install an opaque fence. In some situations, the option here is a little bit, you know, not great, is not as viable due to a number of factors. The alternative being proposed does not include a privacy fence in order to provide the largest unobstructed areas for planting between the building and the property boundary. Staff finds that the reduced buffer width appears to meet the alternative compliance standards set out in 711.3, and all other landscaping requirements for the project are being met. So they are meeting parking lot landscaping, building impact landscaping. This is just the property line buffers, correct? Do you have anything to add? Any questions? Me?
Any questions for Nancy?
I have
Karen?
a question. I'm wondering if the design of the building itself, did that impact the width of the buffer that they had to work with? No?
No.
Okay. That was.
Chardon?
That was my similar question. How did the design of the building not impact the buffer?
I'm going to pass this one off to the applicant.
Yep, please identify yourself and then answer your question.
Yeah, Warren Sugg, Civil Design Concepts. Before I get into the questions, I just want to introduce everybody. We got Dave Braun, who's the seal on the plans, going through construction drawings with CDC. We've got SB and Hannah, who are the owners of the property and the developers of the property, and we have Sean Sains, who's also CDC. How it didn't impact it is because I guess you could argue that just right there where the building itself is could be potentially less, but where the parking is, we're required to have parking for a use there. We've already gone and asked for very modifications from the transportation group on location of the driveway compared to property line, the width of the driveway, the width of the drive aisle, and we've even made wider parking spaces so that we could get that pulled away from the property line. So these folks have bought a piece of property that was subdivided in the 1920s, I believe. So they bought something, it is about half what is required or what is the standard width. There's just not enough width there to do everything when you figure buffers, sidewalk, the necessary driveway, parking, all those things. It would be unbuildable.
I did forget to mention that. So what he meant was, this lot was subdivided before we had this is in commercial industrial. So before we had standards for lot widths and such in commercial industrial. So it is smaller than our standard lot size for commercial industrial. And so we call that legal nonconforming.
Chardon?
Follow-up question for maybe you, Nancy, and more experienced commission members. Has there ever been this precedent before where the size of the building reduces the buffer zone to the point where we have to reduce? And so why is that not considered an action of the property owner?
I mean, I can answer that to some. Some of it is just, it's because of the site constraints. That sometimes it's due to the operations of the building that you have to have certain distances and so forth with building code also, depending on what type of use is proposed in those structures.
I recognize, like,
I mean,
it doesn't seem like this is
a few
such a
times.
situation to make a big point about this with the right-of-way and it's probably forested area behind that. But I do have to voice concerns about setting the precedent of allowing this reduction of the buffer zone because they want a building this size.
Any other questions or comments? Karen?
I agree with Chardon's concerns on that.
I mean, a 3,000 square foot manufacturing building is not very large for a manufacturing facility.
I understand, but it's
And
still,
that's the-
for the site, for the lot, to build a 2,500 square foot building, it might allow for the correct buffer zone. Correct me if
Right.
I'm not understanding this correctly.
And that's what, so basically what the zoning is saying is that we want this as commercial industrial and that there's certain types of uses that are allowed in commercial industrial. Usually those have larger buildings than this because you can't do a single family home. You can't do and I don't have the uses table with me right now, so don't quote me on that. But, I mean, and it being a substandard lot is why they're even doing a fairly small manufacturing facility that does kind of fit the site better than, and generally, anything that comes on this site is gonna have to come ask for forgiveness for something.
Sure.
Probably, just based on the uses that the zoning maps and everything says that they want in commercial industrial. I mean, that's.
Karen?
I guess the concern is, or at least my concern, and this is, and I'm sorry, that this is definitely not meant to, pinpoint this project. It's just projects in general that are asking for, 50% of the buffer based on what is essentially the building design. In this time, we need to be maximizing our green infrastructure and making sure that we keep that. And so that's where this concern comes in from my perspective.
Well, and so staff can provide a 50% reduction in the buffer if there is a fence there.
I understand
And then
that,
the
but-
fence then takes away from In this case, because it is centenary, it takes away from the actual potential vigor for the plant, for the actual buffer to exist in that area. That's the, so we can do it with fence, but that's the, I mean, and that's a staff level decision. As a-
Please try to say, yeah.
My name is SB, and my wife
Please,
and I are.
please come up to the microphone and identify yourself.
My name is SB, and my wife and I are the ones that are developing the manufacturing facility. And I just wanted to tell a little bit more about the project. It's actually, it is technically a manufacturing facility, but it is light manufacturing for our wholesale screen printing business that we've been operating in Asheville for the past 10 years. So it's our dream to build a new facility and get out of downtown, out of a rental scenario. And we found a piece of property that we could afford, and it is a very small piece of property that's very, very narrow. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, so I just want to take a moment. We are not basically kind of like just wrecking a beautiful piece of property. It was a piece of property that has been sort of not tended to, not cared for. There were a couple of shipping containers, trash, cars with smashed windows on it, and it was just in disrepair. And it's our goal. You know, I was born here. Hannah's from Hendersonville. We want to be good stewards of the property, and we're looking for some folks to work with us in these variances because we knew that we were purchasing a non-complying lot because it's smaller in width than the 100 feet. So all we're trying to do is kind of figure out a compromise so that we can build a building that is wide enough for our screen printing, the screen printing equipment that we need to fit inside of the building, and for us to operate safely in there. But in order to do that, we just need some understanding that the property needs a little bit more space with the landscaping. And we love trees and we want to be good stewards of the property. We're just trying to work with a piece of property that is going to be very difficult to develop for our usage without some sort of understanding and compromise. So that's why we're here, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thanks. You're welcome.
Thank you. So while I understand and appreciate and agree with the concerns raised by Chardon and Karen regarding the reduction in the property line buffer under existing code that is allowed. And I think we could deal with that issue separately, perhaps within the policy working group in terms of looking at the existing ordinance and perhaps recommending changes. However, because this staff has determined that this alternative compliance request meets the criteria by which we need to consider in approving or disapproving this request, I'm going to go ahead and entertain a motion.
I motion to approve.
Okay, it's been moved to approve this alternative compliance request. Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the order. All in favor of approving this alternative compliance request, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Hearing none, the alternative compliance request for 75 Glendale Avenue is unanimously approved. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, we've come to the point of public comment. Is there anybody who has signed up? Your turn.
Hi, everybody. Sharon Summerall, former UFC member, and I'm here to talk about the changes in the landscape and buffering standards 711.3, and I'd like you all to write this down if you would. 7-11-3, parentheses 5, little a period, little b period. That is what's called the building impact landscaping that is going to be removed from the new landscaping 711.3 that's now going through the processes. Building impact landscaping is all new developments with an existing or proposed footprint greater than 1,000 square feet. Calculating requirements are 1 tree, 2 shrubs for every 1,000 square feet can be planted anywhere. So this is going to be entirely removed. And so these building impact trees are not going to be required. Now, there has been discussion that in 719, that 3% tree increase in Class C. What I don't know is what does 3% tree increase mean in tree-wise as to what we're going to lose with building impact. And when I was reviewing in TRC, there's quite a few trees that are required for 3,000 square foot over buildings, and that can require as many as 20 trees. So that can be planted anywhere. So I realize that there has to be some kind of compromise, but for me, this is kind of a big deal that's going to impact our tree canopy. So I made it under 3 minutes, which is a miracle. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Anybody else, Jackson? Okay. Moving on to old business, or I'm sorry, staff reports. Martin Foster is out on family leave, so he won't be here making his report as city arborist. Urban forester, Keith?
So I'll certainly be brief here for the sake of time. So we thankfully have already, I think we are done with the request for proposals, or RFP. I submitted that to staff this morning for staff reviews. Zoe had looked at it. I also sent it to Ed a couple weeks ago, and asking for their submissions and their changes and that sort of thing. Went ahead and made some of the changes and recommendations that Zoe has made. And like I said, we were getting to the point where we wanted to go ahead and put it out for staff review. Our goal is to still release it on Monday, next Monday, out to the public, and hopefully get some response back from that. Whether or not we'll still make that deadline is anybody's, well, not anybody's guess, but I'm going to push for that, even if I have to work through the weekend to do that. The RFQ process that we had originally been talking about, requests for proposals, we are not doing that. We are just offering up as an RFP, and then we're going to require the consultant to actually hire the person who's going to be doing the inventory for us. So that will be in the original RFP. The price tag on that, just to give you an idea of where that is about $270,000. The first year, we'll probably spend 180 of that. The second year will be $90,000. The first year, up until the end of this year, will basically be data collection, public inputs, and then next year it will be about data analysis and actually getting into the meat and bones of writing the plan. The project charter, I also got the project charter done. It seems like that's been, one of those forever things. I've started that when I first came in here and didn't really actually get into the meat of that. So that's also out. That'll go out the end of today for internal staff review, get some feedback on that, and then we can go ahead and move further with that. A couple other things I've been working on. Since February, I finally got to go on a vacation after 2.5 years of, kind of going through some family issues. RFP, obviously, TRC, I'm kind of settling into Sharon's job on TRC. That's been certainly a learning experience. My goal with TRC is just to really comment on species selection. So I'm not there to actually look at compliance and make sure, you know, there's enough trees or enough plants. That's up to the planner. I have found some very interesting things with that. Let's see, also been working with the inspectors on going out in the field and doing inspections. We have been having a lot of that go on lately, if anybody knows. You know, topping and heading is you know, accepted practice amongst most people here in town, or at least it seems like. So been going on a lot of those inspections here lately, and then also helping those inspectors write notice of violations as well. TCP inspection, that's kind of another thing that kind of goes along with the inspector's report. So I've been out on a couple of those, you know, based upon public input, public feedback that we've been getting, and, you know, definitely have been finding some issues here and there that, you know, we certainly should address, you know, definitely in the Urban Forest Master Plan, if not sooner. And as well as, you know, creating some SOPs around that, standard operating procedures on, you know, how to handle those situations, what kind of fines we can offer or put out there. And then, you know, last but not least, you know, working with the UFC, you know, and none of those are in any particular order. So, you know, what we, in my working plan that we started at the beginning of February, actually the last bit of January before I went on vacation, was to, you know, identify 5 major points that I need to be working on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, what I've just described to you is essentially what I will be working on going forward. And then, you know, I would say in the interest of time, that's pretty much all I have for, you know, my updates and what I've been working on. Questions?
Before we get to questions, I was remiss in the public comment section for not referring to the commission and the public at large that we did receive one written comment from Gloria Chin. So I just wanted to acknowledge that in the meeting. Are there any questions, comments for Keith?
Yep.
Where will the RFP be actually released?
When? Where? That's something we're going to get with the communication folks about. You know, it will essentially, you know, it'll be out on our website. It'll be, you know, wherever the city normally releases. I can't actually speak to where it's going to be released. I would say, you know, a lot of different publications, you know, probably the Society of American Foresters, you know, so we're, you know, in places that our consultants will essentially be looking for it.
Chris?
When can the UFC expect to see a draft of the RFP?
So as soon as we get done with the internal RFP, hopefully I'm going to push for Friday, if not Monday, but, you know, that kind of, you know, sets back on that release date a little bit. So if we have to work with that number, I would have liked to have gotten that to you today. That was my goal, was to actually have that RFP done for review for the UFC, but I did not meet that goal today. So, but yeah, so I would like to get that to you, give you 2 or 3 days to look it over, make any additional comments and that sort of thing. A lot of the different changes that we've done so far were actually Zoe's changes. So
Most of those were actually just moving things from one section to another.
yeah. So they were just really minor changes, and then we do. Staff has already kind of chimed in on some GIS vocabulary and that sort of thing. So yeah, we just want to make sure that we're hitting all the points that we want to get out of the plan.
Shalom?
For the benefit of the public commenter, Ms. Shen, and anybody else familiar with that white pine, would you be willing to give a little update on the
So
status
yeah,
of that tree?
we are. I talked to Patrick a little bit before the meeting. So essentially, we are going to meet with myself, I would hope maybe we can wait for Mark to come back from his leave. He is on family leave right now. But we are, next week, we actually wanted to schedule a meeting today and meet with community improvements. Or capital improvements, I'm sorry. So we're going to meet with the project leader of the capital improvements team. That tree was scheduled to probably come down this week at some point in time, from what I understand, but we have now essentially stopped that, and we are going to move forward with a meeting first to make sure that we are meeting all our proper procedures before that comes down.
Did they mention what disease they claim the tree is dying from?
So on the arborist report, it said Ips engraver, and it also said some large stress fractures. When I did my initial assessment back on last Thursday, I went out with the grounds person, and I did not see the typical signs of Ips engraver. You know, from what I know from Ips, it happens in the canopy and not on the butt log. So, you know, there was some sap flow on the butt log, but it mainly looked like either woodpecker or just, you know, your basic spring sap flow, essentially.
Thank you.
Karen?
It's my understanding that it was the arborist who evaluated the tree that will also potentially be contracted for its removal.
So, yeah, I think, you know, that's kind of up in the air right now. That's something we're going to have to speak with capital improvements about. And I think what happened was initially they went out and they were supposed to do some spading on those trees. And so the contractor and the arborist who was going to be doing the spading on a sycamore tree happened to also do some walk around on the property, and you know, he noticed some of these issues with the white pine, and then so he essentially wrote an arborist report based on that. But I don't think, and I wouldn't expect that we will, you know, move forward with that arborist report.
I just want to comment that it's an obvious conflict of interest when the person who evaluating the tree is the person who's contracted to remove the tree. And we see that, I think, a little too much. And I'd like to look for solutions to that too in the future.
Yeah, and the arborist was actually working with the contractor, so he wasn't actually working with the city at that point. So he actually wrote that, his arborist report for the contractor. So yeah, to your point, yeah, we'll definitely look into that.
Any other questions or comments for Keith? Thank you, Keith.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to the tree canopy report that's in the agenda?
As far as the tree protection.
Yes.
Yep, so, I mean, obviously, you know, we have your numbers on the table here. We're still trying to learn that process. Nancy actually ran through Madeline and I, but you can see your updated numbers. You know, your canopy preserved, 249,222 for the month of February. And then, of course, our fee and lieu projections, 286,147 for our urban district, and then for our suburban district, 81,057.
Any questions, comments for Keith on the tree canopy report? Thank you, Keith.
Yep.
Appreciate. Okay, we'll move into old business. First item is the working group updates, policy working group. Christy Fiore.
So for the policy working group, there's a few updates. One's a small group went and met with Buncombe County to explore some options for collaboration, especially in light of the upcoming urban forestry master plan. We feel it's really important that we are planning ahead of time, coordinating ahead of time, so that we can avoid expensive and timely replanning. We find out that we need to coordinate with the county on many of the things that the urban master plan will most likely have us look into. So we're trying to get ahead of the ball to save money and time. And so we went and had a meeting, and unfortunately, there was a requirement for the meeting for it to be recorded or to have detailed official notes, even though this meeting was not public, or that this meeting was more of an exploratory, meeting someone new. And so it was felt by all parties that because it was announced that we needed to take some notes, that the spirit of the meeting did not allow for frank conversation and exploration ideas, and so the meeting was cut short and did not feel super productive. But we will continue to reach out to the county and try to build connections so that we can ideally have really efficient planning into the future. Do I take questions on that before I go on to the next item?
Go ahead, and then we'll come back.
Okay, next item on my list is just an update on Chapter 20 amendments. So I'm just going to recap like where we're at. So the Chapter 20 amendments were proposed by the UFC in December because Mark Foster and his crew are working really heavily on holiday lights during that time. It was mentioned that they would get to that in January. In January, it was mentioned that there was some confusion on whether the city attorney needed to be involved or not. Once that was clarified, I received an email that was forwarded to me that included Mark's feedback, but when I opened the document, there was no feedback in the document. I proceeded to ask Mark for clarification of why the feedback wasn't there. Maybe the document was sent accidentally. And I was subsequently informed that I'm not allowed to reach out to Mark directly, and he's not required to respond to Chapter 20 requests. And so that's just an update of where we're at. It has now been 3 months since we made those amendment suggestions, and we're still waiting for feedback on that. The next item is Google Drive. And so right now we are, this is more of like a question for discussion, trying to figure this out, is right now there's a Google Drive that was created for us to house our documents in for the Urban Forestry Commission. And I think there's just some confusion on like, because it's a city Google Drive, should we be, I'd like to gain some clarification on what, who has access to that, and should we be selective at what documents we put in there so that we're not putting things in there that aren't ready for public consumption, or should that not be a worry? So that we can figure out how to best organize documents in different folders. And that's just something I'm trying to get some clarification on.
I can clarify that real quick. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
that 2024 UFC folder is for you only.
Okay,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
shared with like a ton of people. So
It's shared with some city employees,
Okay.
with the typical city employees that we share all those documents with. So that comes down from a very long thread. And so anybody who has access to that original thread, which is probably 7 or 8 different document or folders deep, will have access to that document. Whether or not they're actually going there, I did limit some abilities of people to actually edit those documents, and most of city staff who have access to it can only view it.
Gotcha, thank you. And then the last thing on my list is the holiday lights. I guess, can I pass it to Karen just mention about holiday lights, or should I get that update?
It's your update.
Okay, Karen's working on
She can
holiday lights.
add her comments.
We discussed at a previous meeting looking into how to recommend that Mark Foster's crew is not responsible for putting up and down the holiday lights, since his crew is highly specialized and highly trained in arborist specialties, and it seems like frankly, a waste of money to use his time on something that doesn't fit those, doesn't use his expertise. And we are continuing to work on that as a group.
So before I ask the other commission members for any comments or questions, I do want to go back to the Google Drive issue. Because the working groups meet, their meetings are not public meetings, they're not advertised, and so the work that the working group does and in reference to putting documents into the working group folders, that should not be accessed by anyone other than commission members. Once the working groups finish a document and that's acted upon by the commission, it can be moved into another folder and become available to the public. As far as the holiday lights are concerned, I did exchange an email with Karen, who asked me a question today. I think it's fair for the commission to ask for or to recommend that a cost-benefit analysis be done in terms of the work done to install and take down the holiday lights versus the other work that a city arborist could do. However, going to the extent of making or recommending a change in a staff member's work or role or responsibility goes beyond what our mission is. If we want to make a recommendation to the city council for a cost-benefit analysis, that would include information and data as to why we're asking this. I think that's fair, and then it would be up to the city council to then take that to the city manager, who would then decide whether or not to take that on to the Department of Public Works. But ultimately, it is the director of the Department of Public Works acting in lieu of the city manager, who will make a determination on what a staff person's work and role and responsibilities are. I just want to make that clear for the commission. Keith, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not. No, that's I think, a reasonable request, for sure.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments for Chris on his?
Yeah.
Oh, Karen? Yeah.
I wanted to just discuss that a little bit further. I'm really thankful for, the support of that formal recommendation for a cost-benefit analysis. But I sat with that this whole month, and it doesn't seem like that's best use of our resources as a commission or for the city. And it seems like, for 2 months of the year, they're essentially asked to take down decor, and that's 1/6 of their annual budget. So, and it does not make good use of their skills or knowledge as arborists, and frankly, I think it's insulting to their skills as arborists. So, what I would like to see, and please give me a little grace here, because this is just kind of me speaking my mind, which is kind of why I feel like I'm here. But I think that we should be forming a better partnership with the Buncombe County TDA, which does have 4 appointed members from the city. They are supposed to be involved with the city, and their job is to make us attractive to tourists. So I think that forming a partnership with them to see if they can help with the decor and to simply use common sense rather than a cost-benefit analysis, because common sense is free and it's fast. So those are my thoughts, and I just wanted to share them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts?
Patrick, I'd be
Sure, Alan.
I would be curious about exploring other ways than requesting a cost-benefit analysis. I mean, to me, I agree with Karen, it's kind of black or white. Like, they're arborists, and they should be doing things that they're trained to do. You know, on the way over here, walking from the parking garage, I couldn't help but notice that every single tree was volcano mulched, freshly volcano mulched, and I couldn't help but think that, you know, maybe they wouldn't be volcano mulched if we weren't having the city arborists spend so much time hanging holiday lights every year. Would it be possible to have the Public Works Director come in here and have a discussion about it? Or is there another way that we could address this besides having just a cost-benefit analysis of something that to me is pretty straightforward?
Yeah, I think we can start, I think we should start with the cost-benefit analysis, just to get those numbers down. As far as, you know, having parks, you know, kind of transferring that duty over to parks, they don't have a bucket truck. That's the only reason, you know, Mark and his crew has to do it, or is, you know, been done in the past because he's the only one that actually has a bucket truck and, you know, the skills to operate it. So I think that's the reason why. But I also, you know, to get back to, you know, Karen's point, I think, you know, that may be something that we can, you know, move forward with the TDA and making that partnership. And, you know, coming up with alternatives to, you know, Mark having to, and his crews having to do that.
Yeah, I understand about the bucket truck. There's maybe the TDA just needs to be made aware of how many sign companies there are in town that have specialized trucks that can sub it out.
Yeah, and that's a conversation with the downtown association too. So, I mean, you know, a lot of different players and, you know, I would, you know, brainstorm some ideas and you know, think of different ways that we can, you know, dress up our city during the holidays.
Great, thank you.
Chris, and then we got to move on.
I'm worried that the I'm curious about how much it costs to do a cost-benefit analysis. How much staff time and money does it take to do that, rather than doing, as Karen had said, and I'm sure many of us seen in other cities, is the common sense thing to do, is to give arborist jobs to arborists and contract out other specialized jobs. So I'm curious, how much does it cost to do a cost-benefit analysis and staff time, and like, yeah, do we have an estimate on that?
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't hear a response to, is there a response to that? It was a question. It was a question. Was there a response? Is there a response?
It was a comment or a question?
It's a question. How much does it cost in time and money to do a cost-benefit analysis?
I could not answer that. I have no idea.
That's fair. I just think it's something for us to consider. And I also would like to reiterate or second what Chardon brought up, that I think it would be wonderful to invite someone in here to have a direct discussion about this issue, rather than going through a lengthy, expensive process and waste. And I am not in favor of using money for a cost-benefit analysis or staff time that I know are both limited resources.
Okay, let me get together with Keith and we'll discuss that and potentially maybe request Greg Schuler to come to the next meeting. He's the Director of Public Works. But let me discuss that with Keith. For the sake of time, because we do have a presentation here, The other working group reports, urban forest master plan, Keith has already covered that. Fee in lieu, Zoe has indicated that there's no update. Appropriate species list.
Also, one of those documents, it's seemingly going to take forever. I got the process on that I essentially have finished that document, and, when I started asking about, what is the process to replace this list with that list, I realized that there's, another process for that, so. And that really starts with a memo, and then it has to go in front of TRC, and there's a lot of different things, moving parts to that as well. So I think what Chris Collins and I came down to was we were actually going to take the master list that is now posted on the website and merge it with the list that I came up with, and Karen and the species group came up with, and Chardon as well. And we were going to merge those two lists, and so that we don't have to go back through that whole long process as well. So we will just take the species that are on there, leave them on there, and then import the species that, we came up with, and then that would come into that master appropriate species list, or recommended species list, whatever the title is.
Any questions for Keith? Thanks, Keith. I just wanted to let the members know that I had separate meetings with our new commission members, John Michael and Patricia. And as a result of that meeting, they indicated that what working groups that they would like to work on that best suits their skills. John Michael said that he would like to join the policy working group. Now, that already has 4 members. I did speak to Ed. Ed is willing to step off as a voting member and continue on that working group just as a technical advisor, which would allow John Michael to join that group as the 4th person. And he also indicated that he would like to serve on the Urban Forest Master Plan Working Group. And Patricia said she would like to use her education background to be on the Education and Enforcement Working Group. And I checked all those with the respective working group chairs, and they agreed, so. Welcome.
Can I make a question, comment on that? So there's been some ongoing confusion on the policy working group about numbers and Ed's role, and I would just like to clarify that all, maybe with someone, I'd like to make sure we're all on the same page and would clarify that everything is good with who's in the working group and the roles, especially regarding to email communication and not having quorums and so forth. So my understanding right now is that there's 4 members on the policy working group: myself, Karen, Chardon, and John Michael. And Ed is part of is included in emails as an advisor. And I know that I've been getting different information about that, and so I just want to make sure that that is okay. I know that, so I'd just like to hear from maybe someone from the city or so forth. I want to make sure that that is okay, that those emails can be sent amongst those 5 people plus Keith and Kim Roney, of course.
So yeah, the clarification on that is, as long as Ed is a voting member for the UFC, he cannot act as an advisor. If he was a non-voting member, he could act as advisor to that committee. So and I clarified this with the clerk's office. So any communication that is related to that working group is considered essentially you would be breaking, or you would have a quorum at that point. So if you talked about, you know, a list of things and you sent an email to Ed and say, hey, what do you think? Essentially at that point, we would be, you know, breaking that threshold and a quorum would be, would come into play.
Does that apply to in-person meetings as well?
What's that?
Does that apply to in-person meetings as well, as far as?
Yeah, in person or any kind of communication that is sent between any members of that working group. So the working group can only be a maximum of 4 folks to not break that quorum threshold.
So, so I'm just still trying to sort it all through, because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm also getting differing information from other sources as well. And I'm not sure who to go to for the final answer, basically, on this. And I want to make sure that I'm following all the rules and not sending emails out to too many people, but I'm also being told different things by different people.
So
is
I'll
there-
forward you the email from the clerk's office when I asked her that question about, you know, can a in-person working group member also receive emails from that working group? And, you know, the clarification I got back from that is if that extra person is getting communications from that working group, then they are considered a working group member. And then at that point, you would have to comply with the North Carolina, you know, open meeting laws. Yep.
Zoe?
I think the urban forest master plan, we may be in the same situation now. We may essentially have 5 members now.
Who's on the committee?
I, Chris, Karen, Ed, and our new member.
Okay, that's, the latest list I had only had 3 members, so we're just gonna have to, I'm gonna have to meet with the different working group chairs and sort that out. When I communicated with Ed about the situation with the policy working group, he was out of town, and it just, you know, quick email. So let's just hold things for now until he's back and I can have a more comprehensive discussion with him, which I'll include you on. Okay?
That sounds good.
Okay. The next item I'm going to, which is the landscaping standards and the missing middle housing recommendations. I had asked Vidila to come to the meeting to answer any questions that we might have. He was here early but had a meeting conflict, so I had to leave. And for the sake of time, I would like to defer this to the next meeting, but I will let the commission know that if we were to take a position on the proposed amendments to the landscaping standards 711.3, as well as the proposed ordinance changes related to missing middle housing, we'll most likely miss the opportunity to send a letter or make comments to the Planning and Zoning Commission, because that commission meets the very next day after our April UFC meeting. So likelihood, whatever position we take, if we take a position, we'll have to go forward to the city council at their meeting on April 23rd, when all of these ordinance changes are going to be brought to them. I will say that as a member of the Missing Middle Housing Implementation Working Group, I strongly advocated, as well as others, and I think staff is going to make this recommendation, that when they take the missing middle housing changes to the city council in April 23rd, they will not be recommending that the council hold a public hearing and vote on that date, but will undertake a vigorous public engagement process so we can get further, so the city can get further input from a wider group in the community than what was on the implementation working group. So we could potentially just narrow our recommendation to the council not to vote on these missing middle housing ordinances at the April 23rd meeting, but we'll bring this back up at the, I think it's the April 2nd meeting, and that will be a major focus of that meeting. So with that, if there's no questions or objections, then we'll move to new business. There is a UNC Asheville graduate student who worked with the Asheville Greenworks to do a tree canopy study and a heat island study, sort of as an update to the tree canopy study that the Davie Resource Group conducted in 2018, and the NASA Develop Young Scientist Group did on the heat island at the same time. Hope Donaldson could not be here to give the presentation, but we have Nicole from Asheville Greenworks who's going to give a presentation to us now. Thank you, Nicole.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Y'all have been sitting a long time. Do you need to like get up and shake out your legs or anything?
I think we're good.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we might not return.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the research that has happened last year and is ongoing. I have Hope's presentation, but there are a number of pieces in play that I wanted to let you know of in addition to the work that's happening at UNCA. So this project was initiated last year. We actually wrote the grant in 2022 to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to participate in their international heat mapping project. They select a number of cities each year, and we were selected to complete a heat mapping study last summer. We had 70 plus volunteers drive 10 routes through the city to collect basically at a I think it's a 10-meter scale surface level heat data. Previous to that, the heat data that we had available for Asheville was collected by satellite. So this is a much more kind of granular level of data that we're able to collect. And the purpose of participating in this study was to map heat disparities. We wanted to understand who was being disproportionately impacted as a means to understand where Greenworks needed to work hardest to plant trees and preserve the ones that were there. We know heat islands are something that we currently experience in Asheville and many cities in the country, and they are expected to worsen. And we know that tree canopy is our sort of best bang for the buck resilience strategy. All of the infrastructure we could create are, in terms of scale, are just much more expensive than keeping the trees that we have. So the study that was completed in 2018 found that we had lost 6% of our tree canopy between 2008 and 2018, which is a very rapid rate of loss given the development that's happening. And at that time, there was an effort done to show how the tree canopy loss was correlated with heat vulnerability. We have many residents in Asheville who have health conditions or socioeconomic conditions that make them sensitive to heat. Not every house was built with air conditioning because folks thought, well, who needed it? It didn't get very hot here. But we are seeing hotter temperatures. We're seeing the heat start earlier and stay longer. It's not cooling off as much overnight. And for folks with underlying health conditions, that can really create a lot of problems. So the the 2023 research project was undertaken. Greenworks collected the data with the help of volunteers, and UNCA, the McCullough Institute fellowship program was instrumental in doing a first analysis of the data, and we now have the NEMAC Center at UNCA doing a second stage analysis of the data. Our project goals were, of course, to expand on the information that was gathered for the 2019 study, map our hottest neighborhoods, and really understand where our trees needed to be. As I said, our trees do a lot of work to protect our residents. So in terms of when you look at all the cities on the NOAA map, we are the smallest city ever selected, and we were selected because we are considered to be a best case scenario. We were sort of compared to cities that have active oil wells happening in their cities, or cities that have prolonged over 100-degree temperature heat waves. And NOAA wanted to see, like, what does a best case scenario look like? And what we found is our city had, which is like great news, it's a nice compliment. If you're competitive like me, you're like, all right, we're doing pretty good. But what we found was Asheville had one of the, if not the highest heat disparity between what our sort of hottest neighborhoods and our coolest neighborhoods. And that comes down a little bit to elevation, but mostly to tree cover. We had an almost 20-degree temperature difference, where most cities were 10, 12 degrees is pretty common, which means our trees are doing their jobs. So the task that we have in front of us is to restore trees in areas of extreme heat and then preserve the trees that are doing so much to protect us, especially folks who have sensitivities. So I'm going to skip over this for time. One of the first steps that the UNCA team did was create a heat vulnerability index to try to understand, well, when you look at absolute temperatures, you don't get the full story because some residents have much more resources and many fewer sensitivities to heat. So we wanted to really understand where were folks going to be adversely impacted by heat and extreme heat specifically. So the way this was calculated was looking at exposure. We looked at heat, where was it hottest? And one thing to note is that the red areas do correlate very strongly with our major transportation corridors. So that's something to, spoiler alert, that's coming up later as well. We also looked at sensitivity. So there are 6 core health conditions that are exacerbated by heat. And we looked at, we incorporated data to really see, when folks are adversely affected by heat, where are we looking to see those effects? And you'll see the red area, that's downtown, South Slope, Asheville, and Barnardsville. And Barnardsville is included because of limited healthcare access. So not the highest temperatures, but vulnerabilities exist because of the population that's there and their difficulties accessing healthcare. And then adaptive capacity, of course. So we had, what was there to help folks mitigate their heat challenges? What vegetation was there? And I will get to, so this is our sort of heat vulnerability index. You'll notice the red areas, that's downtown Asheville. We see the red trailing down to the airport. East Asheville is also has a lot of areas that are heat concentrated, and then between Swannanoa and Black Mountain, there's also a very high concentration of heat vulnerable residents. And that's the map bigger if you wanted to see it. And there's our Barnardsville community as well. So it's not, this analysis was done using satellite data, and it very closely tracks with a lot of analysis that had been done by the City of Asheville Sustainability Department and other groups to really try to understand where can we expect adverse impacts. And I wanted to, I think, so the next step with this research that is happening right now is the team at UNCA and NEMAC are taking the 10-meter street-by-street data that was collected last year, and they're applying a heat vulnerability index, so we'll be able to zoom in on City of Asheville and look neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, who are the folks that stand to experience disproportionate impacts. And we will be using that information to create a map of priority zones for tree planting. We really want to be able to rank our community by the vulnerabilities that they are experiencing. So that work is going on this year. We have a graduate student from the Duke School of Forestry who is doing a sort of thesis in community forestry and is working with Keith and with Ed Macy to create a product that can be integrated into the urban forest master planning process. And Ed is a technical advisor on the students' project, so he's kind of every step of the way been able to coordinate the efforts of this group, and then, of course, with the urban forest master planning process as well. We also have some additional research capacity that was offered by the National Centers for Environmental Information and NASA Develop, which is the applied sciences unit of NASA, to do some additional vulnerability analysis. So we have a summer cohort that we are gathering together now to do some additional analysis on our transportation corridors and to be looking at some of the other tree-related factors that would help inform this kind of priority map that we hope to create. And then we will also, as part of Hope's project at UNCA, we will be building a website to share the results with the public. Folks will be able to look up their address. We've also mapped our heat against our redlining maps to look at the impact of historic housing discrimination on sort of current heat. We really wanted to be able to define disproportionate impacts in a meaningful way so that they can inform the ongoing work of the sustainability department at the City of Asheville and other groups. So we have a lot of exciting research coming up and looking forward to having input from this group to kind of guide that and making sure that the research that we're producing now is very targeted and impactful and helpful for the next steps that the city wants to take in terms of its urban canopy work. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
In terms of input from the Urban Forestry Commission, besides the work that Keith and Ed Macy is doing, what kind of process do you see whereby the commission can give the input that you see?
Well, that is a great question. We have several kind of trains of research running right now. It would be helpful, I don't know if you have a process in place that you like to follow, or you just want to kick it to Ed and see if he could gather feedback and then pass it along, or what makes sense in terms of process. But we're in a moment now where we can accept and inform the research process. So this is a good moment if you have a process to recommend.
Anybody have any thoughts?
I could just send you all an email and you could give your feedback, let you know what's up, if that's the easiest thing.
Karen? Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, it could become sort of part of a subcommittee potentially where, and then whenever that committee is given an update, the rest of the commission can chime in their ideas, something along those lines of a process. It could go under the Education and Community Engagement Committee. Just sharing thoughts.
Sharon, did you?
I was going to ask a general question, like what's the timeline here as far as the study and the work?
That's a great question. So UNCA and the NEMAC Center are the work is currently being done to build a sort of in-depth street-by-street heat vulnerability index, our housing discrimination map, and to do some temperature assessment to really identify which are the hottest neighborhoods, where is it not really cooling off overnight, and to try to see if we can surface some things that deserve additional analysis. So in the summer, that is when we have our NCEI and our NASA Develop cohort working. That will be doing additional vulnerability analysis. The project is being developed right now, but I think we have some flexibility to shape it up through April. And then our Duke student is already off and running, and she will complete her project by December.
So does the commission want to create a separate working group to gather input for this project, or assign it to the Education and Enforcement Working Group? Sorry.
I'd be happy to take that on for the subcommittee if the commission thinks that's appropriate for education and community engagement. We seem to be evolving in a different way than enforcement. That I feel like that's going to be under the Urban Forest Master Plan subcommittee ultimately. What do you think about that, Keith? Does that sound?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best,
That's what's happening?
best route, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that'll, a lot of that education component will come out in the Urban Forest Master Plan, if not sooner. I would say, and I've said it before, I mean, that's probably one of our biggest issues with non-compliance in this city is education, and with enforcement being a very close second because of staffing issues and that sort of thing, so.
Yeah, and ideally we work on prevention, so we don't have to get to enforcement. So that's what education's all about, but I feel like this falls under the education umbrella. So I'd be fine with that, if that makes sense to the rest of the commission.
So is there a consensus to assign this gathering of input for this project to the, I guess, Education and Community Engagement Working Group? Is that now what it's going to be called?
Yeah, that's the direction we're going. We're evolving.
Okay, seems like we have consensus, so you have it.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else for Nicole?
No,
Chris?
I just wanted to thank you. It's a lot of work, I know, and it's really important data, as you know. So thank you for providing that.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity to get people to think differently about their trees and hopefully get a little bit excited about the free work their trees are doing for them. They may not even know about. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate you giving the presentation and hanging around for our whole meeting. All right, if there's nothing else that any commission member wants to bring up, okay, unless there's objection, I will adjourn the March 2024 meeting of the Urban Forestry Commission. Thank you.
Yeah, they were excited to do something NCEI is based on.
In terms of